Here's your Frankenstein author lecture number one. Now, if you are going through these lessons in the order and in the way that I'm asking you to do it, you would have gotten the original background. I would have talked about themes in the last flipped lesson. This lecture is going to be about the authors that influenced Mary Shelley and how she, in particular, got themes from those different participants. So when we talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, there are two significant literary periods or conflicting sections of culture that we have to address in the way that they come together and affect the themes in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So the first of these is the Enlightenment. Now, we of course will discuss this near the end of the first semester, but the Enlightenment is roughly 1750 to about 1789. Now, I'm going to give you 5 significant characteristics for the Enlightenment that I think I want you to write down so that we can then use it as ideas to talk about in regards to the novel. So, number 1 is reason and rational thought is the biggest idea. So for the Enlightenment thinkers, they wanted science. They wanted concrete proof that something existed. The second would be the secular application of methods of science to religion and philosophy. By now, you've all been inundated with the scientific method. You're probably sitting in chemistry going, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But the secular approach, secular is non-religious. So this is the other half of society. So while Victor is all about nature and God in the first 3.5 chapters, it becomes a conflict for him as the story moves beyond that particular point. So secular application of the methods of science to religion and philosophy. We don't believe it if we can't prove it. This is why Victor Frankenstein needed to see the lightning hit the tree to give him evidence of God. When he loses that sort of intuitive idea about the value of God, it's when things start to go horribly wrong for him in the course of the story. So the third major characteristic is optimism and self-confidence. The belief that man is inherently good, the belief in social progress, that society will work it all out. So think about this. Romanticism is the idea that society corrupts man. The Enlightenment thinkers said that society is the safe place where man can exist and have plenty of good things occur with him. So we definitely have a conflict with the Enlightenment idea that the city is good, that science satisfies and explains everything. My fourth major characteristic for your notes is the idea of freedom. Enlightenment thinkers were all about freedom. They were about the idea of the freedom of thought and expression. You can do whatever you want. They're all about liberty and creating freedom. But I want you to pay attention to how this works. Enlightenment thinkers, they believed in freedom. They believed in all of these ideas, but only if it contributed to the advancement of society. The minute man turned away from a nice, safe environment or something concrete, the Enlightenment thinkers said, oh, this is bad. We don't want to get here. We don't want too much emotion and intuitive thought and these kinds of ideas. The fifth major characteristic I have here for the Enlightenment is the idea of education. More and more people were becoming educated by this start of the 18th century. So we wanted to keep in mind that the more people get exposed to education, the more quickly these ideas spread. Look at Frankenstein. In the novel, Victor pursues Albertus Magnus, Paracelsus, tries to get all of this knowledge. But what we see ultimately happening is that knowledge corrupts him and leads him astray. So you want to keep those particular ideas in mind as you look at Enlightenment thinking. The idea of the Enlightenment only represents half of the picture. In these next slides, you're going to take notes on British Romanticism and how that is even more significant to the formulation of Frankenstein than even the Enlightenment was. Whereas the Enlightenment period saw man in common, that is, as creatures, everybody has reason, the Romantics saw diversity and uniqueness. Every person is an individual. Their cry was discover yourself, express yourself. The Romantic artist was all about how his own vision or her own vision of the world was hugely significant. So ideas like dare to know, the Romantics took the battle cry. They took dare to know and they said instead we're going to dare to be. We're going to challenge all of the major norms that exist in society, and we're going to challenge those ideas. We're going to look for all of that developed in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So for summer reading, I've got 4 major characteristics and a couple more bits of context for you in regards to what Romanticism is. So the first major characteristic of British Romanticism is the beauty of the supernatural. So Romantics believed that there were things that they could not see, whether it was ghosts, whether it was spirits. Later in this video, I'm going to talk about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and that's going to have an impact on these particular notes. So the Romantics believed something existed beyond the physical world. For the Romantics, this could be God. For the Romantics, this could be a ghost. This could be a spirit that is following, say, Victor Frankenstein, or following the Mariner because of something that he or she did. This could be guilt. I want you to write that down. This could be guilt. A second major characteristic is the championing of the individual. The individual is the champion. It's not the group idea like it was in the Enlightenment. It's now what does each individual contribute to the overall picture. If we have the bigger picture, we can see how each individual must go beyond themselves, look at the beauty of the supernatural, look at nature, and use all of those characteristics to help him or her in their own personal growth. The third major characteristic is always big for the Romantics. It's the importance of nature. So look at Victor Frankenstein. When he's outside and he's in nature, whether he's in the Swiss Alps, whether he's on Mont Blanc, whether he's outside with Justine and the tree and all those things, Victor Frankenstein is at peace. He's happy. He is inspired by what is around him. It's when he's inside, when he's locked in the upper room where he's doing his studying, that he begins to become corrupted. So the power of nature is very significant in Mary Shelley's novel. And again, I want these characteristics written down in your notes. A fourth major characteristic, and I think very important to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is the idea of technology is dangerous. So the dangers of technology is the fourth theme I want you aware of. A natural consequence of abandoning nature and man using the scientific tools to play God is corruption, is death, is destruction. So for Mary Shelley, writing a novel at the beginning of the 19th century, this idea that the technology is going to destroy the universe is hugely, hugely important. So whereas Enlightenment thinkers valued logic, reason, and rational ideas, the Romantics valued emotion, passion, and individuality. If you go back and you look at my themes, and I'll be doing this all year, the conflict between logic and emotion is paramount, is so very important to what we're doing that we always want to focus on it. I went out and I did some research, and there's this gentleman, Chris Baldick, B-A-L-D-I-C-K. He offers us the following description. He says, and I quote, "Rejecting the ordered rationality of the Enlightenment as mechanical, impersonal, and artificial, the Romantics turned to the emotional directness of personal experience and to the boundlessness of individual imagination and aspiration." So while the Enlightenment thinker was stuck in facts and numbers and observable phenomena. The romantic thinker let all of that go and relied on the power of his or her imagination. So these are some very important characteristics I'm going to want you to have in your notes and be prepared to use as we move forward. Now, I decided to add to your notes on the Enlightenment and British Romanticism the list of authors that began to influence Mary Shelley. Now, I'm only going to give you a couple here in this video, but these are things also that you want to make sure that you have written in your notes. So we know that Mary Shelley was a prolific reader, and she read mythology, she read all kinds of other popular books, and she read some pretty edgy stuff. So this first work, Prometheus, which is a Greek myth or a Greek legend, this was written, and you see his name there, by Aeschylus. So when I ask you to list the works that influenced Mary Shelley and their authors, this is one of those particulars that I want to have you write down in your notes. So I know at this point that this is a lot of information coming to you in a presentation that you may not necessarily be used to. So I promise that I'm almost done. We'll cover the Rime of the Ancient Mariner either in class or in another video lecture, but I want you to take a look at this important quote. This is at the beginning of the book. This refers to Victor Frankenstein and how he's tortured by what he's done. Based on the information in the little Aeschylus piece, this makes a ton of sense. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows that he is being pursued. What is it that pursues Victor Frankenstein in this novel? So I left this as a pretty self-explanatory slide. So 1, what happens to Victor when he plays God? Take 3 different elements that occur in the second half of the novel and use those examples to prove theme number 1. Theme number 2, what's the conflict between logic and emotion in this novel? How are Victor and Frankenstein and the monster 2 sides of that conflict? Again, the more examples you can find from the book itself, the better off I think you're going to be. Contrast the monster and Victor. How, as characters, do they represent each of their own particular issues? If you can come up with that, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape. And I decided to end this particular lecture with a nice shiny picture of my face. So here's the goal. What should you have in your notes? You should have characteristics of the Enlightenment. You should have characteristics of Romanticism. You should have 3 significant themes with proof, details from the story, characters, whether it's Elizabeth, whether it's Henry Clerval, whether it's Victor Frankenstein, whether it's Justine, whether it's the monster. You should have concrete examples in your notes of all the things that we have gone over. You should understand the role that Aeschylus had in the Prometheus legend and how that influences Mary Shelley. You should have a hint in your notes about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, very particularly that quote that I gave you from his individual piece. If you have these elements, you should be ready to go in class tomorrow. With that, I'm going to conclude this video presentation. Good luck, and please review your notes.